Hi, this is Jeff Holsinger. I'm going to do another video on the MB339, but this also applies to any type of aircraft that uses flaps. Since I've done a couple of these videos, I've got a lot of phone calls on the flap system and how to set it up with the MB339 in particular. And I want to show you guys how to use flight mode trims. A lot of guys know about this, and you can just skip this video if you're already using it, but if you don't know what I mean by flight mode trim, I'm going to go through and explain it and show you how to set it up on a IX series radio, but it's pretty much virtually the same on a DX or an NX radio, other than the screens look different. But what I mean by flight mode trims is when you apply flaps on your airplane, like I'm doing here, you always have some sort of compensation in the elevator. And in this case, you know, it's always a little bit of down elevator because typically flaps will balloon an airplane up. You can use your flap system and set your elevator compensation in your flap system, but I'm going to show you a much simpler way to do that without having to fly, land, guess at a number, take off, land, guess at a number. This takes all the guesswork out of it. I call it one and done. You make one flight, you do flaps up, you do approach flaps, and you do landing flaps. You trim the airplane out on each of the flight modes, and then you're completely done. So I'll pause the video and we'll get back to the radio here, and I'll show you how to set your radio up to do that. Okay, so we want to set our radio up so that we have flight mode trims. And a couple of steps you got to go through. First thing you've got to do is you've got to go in to your model setup menu, and then you got to get into your flight mode setup menu, like I'm doing here. And you basically got to put your flight modes on whatever switch you're using for flaps. In this case, I'm the odd duck, but I use this switch here for my flaps. So my flaps and my flight mode now are all set up on switch C, which you can see there. But if you using an NX or DX radio, you just highlight that switch, then you toggle the switch that your flaps are on, and that will set your flight modes up. So now you got 3 flight modes set up on the same switch that the flaps are set up on. Now once you do that, then you need to go into the menu that says trim setup. And what I want to do with trim setup is, instead of all my trims being listed as common, see if I can get a better shot of this, I want to set the elevator and the aileron up to flight mode. Let's do the elevator for example here, and you can see I can make it common. That's the way it's going to default. Common means that no matter what position you have the flaps in, the elevator trim never changes. But I want it to change with my flight mode. So I'm going to put my elevator on flight mode trim. I also did my ailerons on flight mode trim because it allows me to touch up the airplane a little bit if it's trying to roll when I put the flaps down. So you go into your trim setup and you want to make sure that your elevator is on flight mode trim and your aileron is on flight mode trim if you want to use the ailerons also. So once you do that, now I'm going to show you how it actually works. So if you look at my screen, and you can see right now I've got, it's just a number, and your number will be different, but I got -12 on my elevator trim, and that's with my flaps up. When I go to mid flaps, my elevator trim changes to 0, and when I go to full flaps, my elevator trim changes to +28. So what's the advantage of this? I take off on a maiden flight and I trim, you know, my elevator the way I want it. Then while I'm up there, I put 1 notch of flap in. Then the airplane's either going to balloon or dive, and then you go back in and you can trim it. Okay, then after I got that section trimmed, I can go to full flaps, and then I can retrim my airplane again. So what happens is the trim for the elevator moves with the flap switch. So you can see the advantage of that. There's none of this landing and trying to guess at a number on your flap system. I mean, everybody knows how the flap system works. See if I can actually find it here and show you. I guess it's on the other menu. But anyway, so instead of having to go in and over here under elevator and guess at a number, I just leave all mine at 0 basically, and I just do the trimming in flight modes, and that does away with having to use the elevator compensation. Now you can put some numbers in on the elevator compensation and use this flight mode trim system as a touch-up or a fine-tuning, but I find, especially with the MB339, because it requires so little flap or elevator compensation, I just don't even bother putting any kind of number in here, and I just do it right here, because as you see, the most I had was maybe 28 clicks of trim under the elevator. So that is how flight mode trim works with elevator compensation without having to guess at a number on your flap system. This is, you fly the airplane, pull the flaps down, trim the airplane, pull the flaps down to landing flaps, trim the airplane, put the flaps back up to normal, and it remembers all the different trim settings. And you can also, like I said, you can do it with the ailerons. If you have an airplane that wants to roll slightly when you drop your flaps because your flaps are not coming down evenly, you can also do the same principle with the ailerons. You can go up, put a notch of flap in, airplane rolls a little bit, trim a little aileron in it. So if you choose under your trim setup, you want to do ailerons and elevator, just remember that when you fly and you get it all trimmed out and you get your ailerons trimmed, you're also going to have to trim your ailerons the first time that you fly and maiden flight it. You're going to have to trim your ailerons also. So anyway, I just wanted to go over that. It's called flight mode trim. Guys have been using it for years and years and years with flap airplanes, and a lot of guys are getting into the MB339 and they're asking me about flaps, and they're saying, well, what number should I put in, and this, that, and the other. And it kind of dawned on me that these guys don't know anything about flight mode trims. So I started explaining flight mode trims to a lot of the guys that's got their new airplanes, and you can see this light go off. It's like, man, why haven't I been doing that for years? But you know, just a lot of guys don't know nothing about it. So I hope that I pass on a little bit of information that might help flying your airplane, maybe your first jet, or even if you got warbirds or whatever that's got flaps. Always use flight mode trim for your elevator compensation. It just makes life a whole lot easier. Again, if you got any questions, drop me an email or give me a phone call. Thanks.